See you in a minute, okay? Okay, love you.
Love you.
Bye. Bye, Grayson.
Bye.
Okay. Well, I'll just do the intro real quick and shut the door, honey, okay? All right. Well, welcome to Girlfriend Chat, the podcast where we dive into the depths of real talk on life, love, and everything in between. I'm your host and the creator of this awesome show, Tammy Nash, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have you here with me today. Um, Today, we're going to tackle some important social issues affecting women. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we're going to be diving into the difficult and sensitive topic of domestic violence in the United States. In this episode, we'll discuss the scope of the problem, its root causes, and the resources available for survivors. Dawn Wilcox is a full time registered nurse in Texas who began researching and documenting femicide, the murder of women or girls because of their gender, in 2016. She also challenges victim blaming media reporting about violence against women and girls. Dawn is a domestic violence survivor and the founder and executive director of Women Count USA, Femicide Accountability Project. Please be aware that this subject matter can be difficult and upsetting. And practice self care. We will be providing links to resources for any viewers who may be experiencing or have a loved one who is experiencing domestic violence. We have the ticket going across the bottom for one of the numbers. Domestic violence affects countless lives across the country, and it's time we break the silence and raise awareness about this issue. In this episode, we'll discuss the scope of the problem, its root causes, and the resources available for survivors. So, without any further ado, as they say, here is Dawn, our host for today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me here. The timing couldn't have been better because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. It's my second passion. I work full time as a public school nurse. And, a lot of people think, well, what does that have to do with domestic violence? But it's actually an issue that I see affects my students at school, their families, and I consider it, as many do, a public health issue. And so it's something that in my spare time, I've taken up sort of as a second job. But so when we talk about domestic violence, the first thought many people have is physical violence. And that certainly is one aspect of domestic violence, I think, that garners the most attention. It can be the most upsetting. But there are other forms of domestic violence that can be just as damaging, and studies show even sometimes even more damaging and harder to overcome. So physical violence includes the intentional use of physical force that causes injury or harm, such as hitting, slapping, pushing, or choking. And choking is a common term we see, but it's actually strangulation. So choking is more, choking on an object in your throat that obstructs your breathing. But strangulation is pressure on the neck that obscures either your ability to breathe or the circulation of blood. And it is a particularly dangerous predictor of further violence for women. So that is something that should be paid attention to. And then we've got emotional and psychological abuse, which involve behaviors designed to control, manipulate, or intimidate a partner emotionally. Things like constant criticism, humiliation, threats, and especially isolation. If you can isolate that victim from family members who might be able to see the beginning, subtle changes or offer assistance or intervene, then you can escalate in your behavior uninterrupted. Verbal abuse, which includes using insults, name calling, yelling, belittling, all of these things are used to control the victim, and often they serve to even in cases where that partner is not hitting or laying hands on someone, it can make them fearful enough that could happen. Sexual abuse, which includes, obviously non-consensual sexual activities or coercion, um, things like rape, sexual assault, forcing the victim to engage in unwanted sexual acts. Financial abuse, which occurs when they control the victim's finances, they restrict access to money or sabotages their independence, doesn't allow them to work, is a very frequent um, thing that you see. And sometimes things overlap. So not allowing a woman to work can be part of the isolation, but it also can be that sort of control with the financial abuse. Stalking can take place and typically takes place once the woman has ended the relationship, but it can take place actually within a relationship. Has ended the relationship, but it can take.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. So it's persistent unwanted attention, either in person or through technology, such as phone calls, text messages, or social media harassment. I know that I've documented cases where women were under constant camera surveillance in their own home by their partners. I actually documented a case of a woman who was ultimately murdered by her partner, who had to sit on the couch all day, call him for permission to get up, even to go to the restroom. When we think about stalking, we often think about strangers, but stalkers are often people women know, and most frequently ex-partners. Cyberbullying and online harassment, domestic violence can extend to online spaces where abusers use social media, emails, or other digital means to harass, threaten, or intimidate victims. And sometimes that can also carry over into other areas, like when we talked about sexual abuse. Abusers will either threaten to or post intimate pictures of the victim.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, and so what we call like revenge porn.
Mhm.
And then coercive control. And coercive control is really, I think, if you had to look at one behavior that's an absolute cornerstone of most abusive relationships, it's coercive control. In the UK, it's recognized as a crime. Unfortunately, it is not recognized as a crime in the United States, but it's a pattern of controlling behaviors that are used to dominate and manipulate a partner. It can include things that we've talked about, like isolating the victim, monitoring their activities, and making them financially dependent. But it also can extend down to even the smallest details of her life, of what clothing she can wear, how she's supposed to vote, who she can have as friends, who she's allowed to talk to. I know that I was in a relationship where I was definitely told what I could wear, what I couldn't wear, not allowed to wear white t-shirts because maybe someone could see my bra, not allowed to wear a button-down shirt because somebody could look in between my buttons. And to the point where it was really, so controlling, it was difficult to be comfortable in Texas and in the summer. So spiritual or religious abuse, they may use religious or spiritual beliefs to control and manipulate the victim, or use religious texts and beliefs to justify their behaviors. And unfortunately, some churches help to perpetuate that. Victims who go to their spiritual leaders for help and assistance have often been told that's part of being a wife. You need to try harder. Divorce is a no-no. All of those kind of things can be very, very damaging, because sometimes spirituality is one of the only things that a woman has kind of left. What she thinks in her mind, or relationship to God, and to have that to also be used against her can be highly damaging. Their cultural or identity can be used to abuse them. Some abusers may exploit cultural differences, their immigration status, which I see very frequently, or use other aspects of their identity to exert power and control. So, when a woman is an immigrant to the country, either legally or illegally, doesn't know the language, doesn't know where to get resources. This can be, a huge barrier to trying to even get help. And then intimidation, threats, gestures, other means to control and the victim's behavior. I think that most women who have been in, and some men, this is something that happens to men too, have been in abusive relationships. They are the experts at navigating that person. They have had to become experts in looking at the other person's mood, their expressions, constantly hyper vigilant and surveilling their environment for potential danger, to know, is he going to go off? Just some women say, even by the way, he opened the car door and shut it, I can tell what the night's going to be like, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then property damage. And this is a really big thing because, first of all, he may destroy her property as a means to hurt her, things that are of significance, family mementos, and just to, cause the person upset, and have to replace things or go without things. But also there is a unspoken message: you're next. If I can punch a refrigerator so hard that I leave a dent the size of a watermelon, I can do that to you too. So that is often used in a very frightening and effective cause of control. So it's important to understand that, domestic violence can involve a combination of these forms, and it often escalates over time.
Now, can I ask, does domestic violence also include others that aren't your significant other, like a family member, parent, anything like that? Would you also describe it as domestic violence?
It's interesting that you asked that question, because to me, if I had been in charge of sort of defining what domestic violence is, I would have defined it exactly that way. That domestic violence would be any of these behaviors perpetrated by a family member, either through blood or marriage, right? That includes fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and then I would have called intimate partner violence romantic partners, or, and it's very interesting, because when I started the work that I do with documenting femicide, it was very easy to find cases that are being tracked that are perpetrated by current or former partners. And I quickly saw, and I knew that, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot of other men in a woman's life that she knows and trusts, starting with family members who are, abusing them or even, killing them. Cases, of sons or in-laws, elder abuse, all of those kind of things, whether it's through neglect or, physical, sexual, financial abuse. Absolutely.
Yeah. My biological mother was an emotional, manipulative, evil. She was physical too, but she was literally that way. So I feel like she set me up for my first marriage, because I married someone that was the male version of her. And it just was a cycle that just kept going until I was strong enough to finally go enough, and it wasn't, I probably would have still endured if he hadn't have struck my 11-month-old daughter. And that was what gave me the strength to, but so that's interesting, because you never hear of, like a daughter saying domestic abuse by her mother.
Yeah, that and that is absolutely true. I mean, this is domestic violence, especially if you look at just intimate partner violence, women are overwhelmingly, the victims and the victims of fatal domestic violence. But men are also victims, and all those dynamics you're talking about, where women absolutely can be perpetrators with victims who are either male or female. I mean, I think it can overlap with what's called child abuse, but absolutely, I think that, child abuse probably should be under an umbrella of, domestic violence.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. No, I agree too. And I think it's good that you were saying, like, there's so many different ways, and you don't realize sometimes, that people always say, oh, they don't always admit it because they feel like it makes them look stupid, but it's so easy to get into that, because I think we've all been in those kind of relationships, and we've all seen it or had a loved one that's been in. And it's so easy to get trapped in it because it doesn't start big, like you said. It starts with these little tiny things, and and little by little you're already in that situation. And sometimes I've seen, like, I've talked to a lot of my students to be very careful, because I think in some ways, I don't know if it's just the way girls, because like you said, it is a lot of girls and women. And I think there's like a way that maybe that society brings us up to think, oh, he really loves me. That shows he really loves me because he's jealous, and he's very protective, or like all these things that we think of as positive characteristics, which can be to a point, but it's to that point.
Yeah.
And it's just so easy to get wrapped up into a situation and then turn around and go, when did that even happen? Like you said, they start pulling you away from your friends. Like, I know when I was in high school, I had a boyfriend. It was like, I never saw any of my friends anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I waited for him, made him brownies, made him this, made him that, waiting for him at home because he might stop by. And that's how he kept me at my house while he did whatever he wanted.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's
Absolutely.
like, there's very, very, I guess my point is, there's a lot of really bright women out there who find themselves in these situations. It's not like you're not dim-witted, you're not ignorant, you're not oblivious.
Neurologists, lawyers, doctors. I mean, every single socioeconomic status, education level. And what's really interesting to me is it's almost like these men have the same playbook, because they really do perpetrate the same. And I'm talking about men for the most part in domestic violence, in intimate relationships. All of these behaviors that I just described, I see them in cases of men who are good old boys in the backwoods of Kentucky who abuse and kill wives or girlfriends, and new immigrants from Iraq that live in Seattle. I mean, it's really almost like they get this playbook across cultures, across countries, that I don't know, that aspect of it really fascinates me, and it's very mysterious. Like, how do men innately know or learn these techniques? Yeah.
Well, I definitely think, I mean, there's so much in the media. I think it's so much of, like, I think part of it is too, like, the way that they're raised to, like, show no emotion, be in control, I think a lot of it is control, like, and I think it does start, like, Tammy, like you said, like, you're in a situation when you're younger, and I'm not saying that's always the case, but if you have an adult who is very controlling, you think that's kind of the norm, even when you're inside, it's not, it doesn't feel right. But that to you was like your security, kind of. It's like, that's what I know.
Well, now that where I'm at in my life now, I reflect back and I go, it's sort of like that. It's like, okay, my growing up was like, you don't matter what we say you do. You don't get to express yourself. You don't get to stand up for yourself. You don't, none of this stuff. And then literally then, raped at 16. I can't tell my father because my stepmom and my dad freak out because they find out the boy's bragging that, you know, there was relation, and then my father finds out. He ends up flipping out in the kitchen. My stepmother calls me a really bad name, and it just is like all belittled. So I never tell them the truth because I feel like, they don't deserve it. I leave home at 16. I join the military. I meet this guy. He like seems to have it all, and he turns out to be my mother, and he becomes controlling, and he was the opposite. He wanted to do, so I'm a conservative dresser. He wanted me to dress promiscuous. I can't do that. He would get mad and angry. He would want me to be a specific way. I can't do that either. He would get mad and angry. I go to college. He doesn't like it. He threatens my life. He throws a glass at my head. I have to drop out of college. All this stuff is so controlling, and it just was always that way. And so it diminished my light. And to this day, I still have a problem with, the good enough stuff. And so I'm always busting myself up, trying to prove to the world that I am good enough. And I'm finally starting to just come out of it. And here I am, almost 60 years old. It's like finally trying to get my mind out of that way of thinking. And I've been married to a really totally different guy for 28 years. And it's like, it's such a mountain to overcome. And you just never seem to like get to that where you can finally go, and come back down to another way of thinking,
I don't think you're really ever the same. I know that from, a couple of relationships that I have, I definitely have untreated PTSD, and I mean, studies show that domestic violence survivors have PTSD that's like almost worse than what you get with veterans in war.
Yeah.
And I know that even to this day, like I don't like the sound of a garage door opener. It makes, it means he's home. For a long time after that relationship ended, I would just drive and not look, left or right. Because if, God forbid, I looked to the left or right and there was a guy at a stoplight, do you want him? Why are you looking at him? It'd be 3 days of being berated and terrified. And, so those things do stay with you. But I think underneath all that too, I kind of feel like God help the next person who tries to treat me that way. Cause there's a lot of rage too. I mean, still, and I think the older you get and you look at that and you understand how terribly you were treated. I would never, the person I am now, I wouldn't tolerate one bit of that.
Yeah, I kept tolerating because I was never like physically hit by him, but I've had a knife up to my neck. I've had the threats. He had me and the two girls, right at the edge of a cliff and say he's going to drive off it. All those things that were like terrifying, but never like scarring, if you will. You know what I mean? In the physical sense of it.
Yeah.
And it was just all like psychological warfare. It's literally what it was.
And there are a couple of nurses, I believe in Canada, that study, what they've labeled non-state torture within abusive relationships. And those are things like this really severe psychological torture, like you're describing, women who are told, pick which kid you want me to kill, which one's going to survive. Women who are even, physical stuff, waterboarded. And I know that I'm documenting waterboarding more frequently since we heard about Abu Ghraib, and, we see it now in movies and things like that. It's like, it's another thing that people are using to abuse others.
Yeah. I was driven to the abortion clinic and said, get out. You're not coming home until it's done. And he left me there. And I literally told them inside, what happened, and they still went through with it. I was like begging for help, and they were like, "Okay, your turn."
Oh, I'm so
And,
sorry.
yeah,
That's
it's just a lot of that stuff. I mean, the stories just keep,
yeah. And that, that's why no matter whether you're, pro life, pro choice, it really, it just demonstrates how you need to have that choice, because there are cases where men do that. I've heard of that before, where they force a woman to have an abortion or kill the woman because, they don't want that pregnancy. Or conversely, forced pregnancies and, uh, you know, when a woman doesn't want to have children, making her have children. Yeah.
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 So do you want me to go on to the root causes?
Yeah.
So, root causes and societal factors of domestic violence are important, when you realize that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So, it's a very complex issue with a lot of contributing factors. And while the factors can vary between individuals and situations, some of the common causes include power and control. So, at the core of many abusive relationships is the abuser's desire for power and control over the victim. And this one may even be kind of like the top dog primary. They may use various forms of abuse to maintain dominance and assert their authority. And then societal norms and gender roles. And these are things that we learn, from the time we're kids, that boys are strong and capable and they get to sit down on Thanksgiving and watch football, and girls are weaker and stupid and they get to do all the work and wash the dishes. So as silly as that sounds, I kind of, when I look even at femicide, I've often said that if you look at it like a train station, femicide is like the final stop. A lot of things have happened before a woman has been killed. Because in order to kill somebody, we have to first dehumanize them, strip them of their humanity. So gender roles and societal norms reinforce the stereotypes about masculinity and femininity, contributing to a sense of entitlement and superiority, specifically for men. Cultural factors, beliefs and practices can influence how individuals perceive and respond to domestic violence. Some cultures may condone it and tolerate it, and even family members might kind of be part of that. You'll see family members reinforce expectations and control, and sometimes even participate in the abuse of the individual. And so that makes it difficult for victims to seek help, especially if they're in very tight-knit communities. A history of abuse or trauma is sometimes present for abusers. We know that's a high-risk factor, and it can contribute to their own cycle of violence. So they saw it, it's been normalized, and we become what we see. And it's important to note that all survivors of domestic violence do not perpetrate it. Unresolved conflicts and stress, high levels of stress and financial difficulties can escalate tensions. Substance abuse greatly increases the chance of domestic violence, and that includes, drugs and alcohol. It lowers inhibition. It impairs your judgment. It's not uncommon to see, even with cases of fatal domestic violence, that alcohol and substance abuse has been a factor. Lack of education and awareness. People may not understand the dynamics of healthy relationships, or, like we said, had those examples, or the consequences of abusive behavior. And sometimes the consequences legally are none or nil, but also thinking about consequences to children that witness abuse, and kind of that whole cycle that we just talked about. And that contributes to the perpetuation. Isolation, like we talked about, abusers often isolate victims, and so there's not a way for them to escape. A lack of resources, so those can be financial resources. Those can be a lack of beds in community shelters. So, if you live in some small town, you may not even have a domestic violence shelter. You may not have a car to drive to get yourself help or financial resources. Trying to get legal assistance. Courts are often used to perpetuate abuse by abusers once women are have the bravery to leave. And courts, unfortunately, have a long way to go in not becoming unwitting, helpers to abusers. Most of the time when abusers ask for custody, they will get custody. And, there's been that debunked parental alienation syndrome that's often used, families being sent to reunification camps against their will and all this kind of thing. So, that can be very, very difficult. So, socioeconomic factors, poverty, obviously, economic dependence, if you don't have your own way of making money. And then, sometimes women will go back because they don't have a means of making an income on their own. And that person is their financial stability, not only for themselves, but for their children. Cultural stigma surrounding divorce or separation may discourage victims from leaving, and lack of legal protection. So weak and poorly enforced laws related to domestic violence can embolden abusers. It's not uncommon to see no bail, low bail, repeated offenses against multiple women. And unfortunately, sometimes getting a protective order or a restraining order can actually escalate things. So it's very important for women to get professional safety planning. What's good for and helpful and safe for one woman may not be for another. So
When he hit my daughter across the face, he left a hand mark for 3 days. That's how hard he hit her, in a car seat for crying. And he just pulled over on the side of the road and did it. And so I was told if I don't report it, that I have a chance of losing my child as well.
Yeah.
And when I called the state, we lived in North Carolina at the time. When I called the state and they came up, he was like so nasty, telling me that I betrayed him and how dare I, and he went completely bonkers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or women are told, and this drives me nuts. Like when you see reporting, like for instance, when women have been killed, and they always go and they interview the neighbors, and I call it the nice guy narrative. Oh, he was great. He
That's what everyone thought.
Barbecue, blah blah blah, and they do not have any idea what's going on in that home. It's not helpful. For all he has looked at her and through gritted teeth and said, if you ever call the police on me, I'm taking your kids away. You'll never see them again, or I'm going to kill you. I'll kill your family. I'll kill your dog. I mean, you just don't have any idea what's going on. Or like you said, you're put in this impossible position of choosing between protecting your child and possibly having your child taken away because you're not reporting like you've been told to do, and then having his wrath, but it's a combination certainly of factors, and you never know what's going on, like I said, in somebody's home.
Yep, so true.
And so do you want me to move on to kind of like breaking the silence? And
yeah, that's because I was just thinking too. So what do we do? You suggest? What do you do?
Well, so breaking the silence is about, it kind of overlaps, but it's, and we're going to go on to resources too after this, but this is more to help people understand some, to expand on what I just said about what keeps women in relationships. And other women can be sometimes the hardest judges. And I call that whistling past the graveyard. If I don't date a guy with tattoos, then I won't have to worry about being a domestic violence victim. if I don't, do this or do that or live there, or that, because it is so common. And sometimes, you're in the relationship before you realize what's going on. Often, it's kind of like the frog in the water, they slowly turn up the heat, that it really can happen to anyone. And so I think sometimes women do all these if thens to make themselves feel safer and like they're
Right.
more in control, that couldn't possibly happen to me. But the kind of things that keep women in these unhealthy and abusive relationships are numerous. There are many barriers that make it difficult for them to seek help or escape situations. And I was profiled in the American Journal of Nursing and did like a one pager for nurses on how to help people. And one of the most important points is these can be very frustrating cases. I'm just going to tell you, I can imagine how frustrating I was, because there were some people I was confiding in, but I'd confide in over and over. And I'm sure they were just thinking, just get the heck out of there. What is wrong with you? But to non-judgmentally listen, to continue to just offer support and help, and understand that it takes women sometimes multiple times before they finally leave. They may go back to that relationship many, many times before they're ready to make that final break. So just don't give up. You're planting seeds, and you can either shut down the woman to the point where she'll never try again, or leave it open so she remembers in the past somebody helped her and so she can try again in the future. So fear keeps women in these relationships, fear of retaliation or further violence from the abuser. They may worry about the consequences of reporting the abuse, including more physical harm to themselves or to their children. And like we talked about, because they're isolated, they don't have the support of family and friends or access to networks of support or the ability to confide in others, just to kind of bounce ideas off, to be able to talk about what's going on and have your girlfriend say, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like a red flag to me. Financial dependence, like we talked about, emotional manipulation. Women often love these men. They have children with them. They have lives with them. And they can be very, very charming and very kind and very sweet. They didn't just meet this woman and start beating her up.
Right.
And it's the cycle of, escalation, and then, I'm sorry and apologizing, and that honeymoon period. It's a very emotionally manipulating situation. They may break that woman down so much and break down her self-esteem so much that she feels like she deserves it, like it's her fault, like she'll never find anyone who will love her. They often are calling the woman fat and stupid and, incapable. And they begin to internalize those messages. And lack of awareness. So they may not recognize, like we talked about, that they're actually in an abusive relationship. And just like we talked about perpetrators having histories of being exposed to abuse, often victims can be too. So they've also seen unhealthy relationships modeled. And the overall messages that especially women get in society are to be people pleasers, to put other people's feelings first, to, especially please men, and those kind of messages. So, and then shame and stigma. So they often feel a lot of shame about, maybe their choice of a partner. They feel like it's their fault. Because it's been very gradual, they may not have, a way that they can disclose their experience. So they may not have maybe they had friends to start off with that they could talk to, but as he's isolated her, I was in a relationship once where my friend told me years later that she called my house to talk to me. And my partner at the time said, Dawn doesn't want to know how to tell you this, but she doesn't want to be friends with you anymore. I was like, what? So you may not know what's going on at the time. And like we talked about, cultural and religious beliefs. So, you know, that we talked about already. Lack of resources, legal aid, counseling, affordable housing. I mean, it's hard right now for people with two incomes to afford housing in the United States, never mind a woman who's on the run from an abusive relationship. And then worrying about the children's well-being. So, that whole idea that we don't want children to be from broken homes, that they may be fearful of losing custody, and that's a very valid fear for women, or exposing their children to further harm. I know for me, I kind of felt like, well, it's better to be here because at least I'm around my children all the time instead of having to hand them over to this guy every weekend, wondering, are they okay? And that's a very real fear too, because we do have cases where children have been murdered by the non-custodial parent as a means of punishment. If you kill a woman, she's dead. If you kill her child, you kill her over and over again every day with grief and heartache. And then legal barriers, like we talked about, the processes may be complicated for getting restraining orders. Sometimes even police departments are not fully educated in what women's rights are or what victims' rights are, and that can be very overwhelming. If they're immigrants, sometimes their spouse will say, "I'm going to turn you in," especially if they have they're in the country, what we call illegally. We shouldn't, undocumented. So that can be used as a threat. A lack of trust in authorities, especially in like African American communities where a woman might be concerned that the police are going to show up and, something's going to happen and they're going to kill him. And, I don't want him dead. I just want him, I don't want him to hurt me anymore, Then they also may fear that they're not going to be believed. And, some of the studies that we look at with the rates of domestic violence among police officers are very high. And, if my house was burglarized and I called the police department and there was a 40% chance that the cop who shows up to help me also burglarizes houses, that can be very concerning. So the rates among domestic violence and police themselves, and, are you really going to get help? Are they going to believe you? And are they going to understand? The psychological impact, domestic violence relationships cause really untold and immeasurable. It's very difficult to put a number on this. Cases of depression, anxiety. I mean, technically speaking, as I document femicide, I would want to document women who kill themselves because of being a domestic abuse victim, but it's almost like impossible to put a number on that. But we know that
I've literally been told, and it's crazy to think about that the trauma that you've been through has probably what stirred up autoimmune in my body. And it's crazy to think about that.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I think since the episode that you did on autoimmune and chronic disease, I read an article about why women get 80% of the autoimmune disorders. I should have sent it to you. It was about stress. It was all stress. It was all being responsible for everything. Full-time jobs, kids, remembering the birthdays and who needs to go to the dentist, and all of that stress that is and that actually, you know what? It wasn't an article. It was a YouTube video with a I don't know if he was a doctor, but he was talking about the stress that women are under and why they think that is causing autoimmune.
Yeah, it's crazy because even like they couldn't explain the gastroparesis in me because I'm not diabetic and I don't have an eating disorder, and they were like, it just is. And then I just got sicker after I got diagnosed, and it was like, well, then you got this and you got that. So anyway, it's just this ginormous snowball now. But literally, doctor. He's an MD, but he's also a functional medicine doctor. He talked about the trauma and this and all the things that I've gone up and how it can cause the issues that I'm going through. And then my son in his first year of med school said the same thing. He says, guess what I learned? Your trauma is probably what caused you to get so sick.
Wow.
And I was like, that is so crazy.
It
I
is,
think-
and it just speaks to the, that we need to start addressing, trauma. Hi, how are you?
Night night.
Yeah, little sweetheart.
My only granddaughter.
Oh,
5 grandsons, 1 granddaughter.
that's so
Shut
sweet.
my door, honey. Thank you.
And so, addressing these barriers requires a comprehensive, empathetic approach that involves providing safe spaces, education, legal protections, and social support for survivors, and awareness campaigns, community outreach, and accessible resources can help empower victims to seek help. And that's another thing that I talked about in, the article that I was in the American Journal of Nursing, is that you cannot make decisions for these women. You really cannot. I mean, they've already been stripped of their power.
Yeah.
Often they're in adulthood, they're infantilized, and stripped of power. So it's very important to give women the strength and the skills to make good decisions for themselves and not make decisions for them. Now, obviously, if it's an emergency situation, sometimes you might have to say, he's coming down the street with a gun, we're getting out of here and calling the police or whatever, and so then on to prevention and awareness. So prevention obviously is key. It's a very multi-layered. It's very difficult. There's not one approach. It requires a lot of effort at various levels of society. And some of the strategies and approaches to prevent domestic violence are education and awareness, like public awareness campaigns to promote awareness about domestic violence through campaigns that challenge stereotypes, myths, and misconceptions surrounding abuse. School-based programs, especially those that teach children and adolescents about healthy relationships, consent, and conflict resolution. Early intervention, so identifying red flags, training professionals, everyone from teachers to healthcare providers, law enforcement, to recognize the early signs of abuse and intervene when necessary. So even things like a friend of mine, Kelsey McKay, who is amazing, former prosecutor in Austin and a strangulation expert. So she...
Night, honey. Night, honey. I love you too.
So she prosecuted nothing but
I
strangulation.
will see you in the morning.
She prosecuted nothing but strangulation cases for many years. So she does a lot of teaching with law enforcement. When you go out there, that would be a huge red flag. That's a high predictor of being murdered. So when a police officer goes out and that woman has like a fragmented recollection of what happened, did she lose bladder control? Even if you don't see marks on the outside, does her voice sound hoarse? Do you see petechiae or little pinpoint hemorrhages around her eyes? All of those kind of things to look for and to recognize the lethality of that behavior can identify a red flag. To youth programs, offering programs and resources for at-risk youth that focus on anger management, communication skills, and alternative to violence, especially for young men. Domestic violence is and our expectations of men to always hide their feelings, boys don't cry, all of that is very, very damaging to boys and men. I remember being a middle school nurse and I'd have boys come in who had broken their arms. I mean, the bone was sticking out and they're just trying not to cry, and I would tell them, look, it's okay to cry and you have tear ducts for a reason. And, it's okay. If you weren't meant to cry, you wouldn't have them. So,
Right.
okay. And then also, Under early intervention, I talked about youth programs, support for victims. So access to services, you want to ensure that victims have access to safe shelters, legal assistance, counseling, and support groups. And, one of the things with shelters is, sometimes women can hide where they're living, but they can't hide where they work. So making sure that that's not forgotten, that that woman has a safety plan for work. At work, women don't have a control over their security. They don't have control over who's allowed in and out of that workplace. And so a lot of women will be targeted at work if the man can't find out where she is in a domestic violence shelter. I just documented a case where a woman was killed in a fire station, which was being used as a safe place for her. He waited for her laid in wait, somehow found out where she was, because shelters are supposed to be hidden, but it was being used for a shelter, and shot and killed her in the fire station. So and then and then economic empowerment, so providing resources and programs to help victims gain financial independence and housing stability. Legal reform, so strengthening laws that including restraining orders and penalties for offenders. We have some good laws that we need to make sure we use, and we have some bad laws that we probably need to change. Gun control, enforcing stricter gun control measures to prevent abusers from accessing firearms. 69 to 70% of the women that I document who are murdered are killed with a firearm. So I support, the Second Amendment, while at the same time understanding that it's probably not a good idea for people with a documented lack of self-control, anger issues, volatile tempers to have access to guns. And even to have something in place for like men as they get older. Many men that kill their wives when they're older, I often wonder, some I think are probably domestic violence, and it's just a, continuance of that behavior. But I often wonder, does he have dementia? Is he paranoid? And he's 85, 90 years old and still has access to weapons, and no longer maybe has the ability to make good choices or be safe with weapons. So, and then cultural and community initiatives. It's important, I think, for people to have support that is culturally sensitive, and to support communities to be able to provide that for people in subcultures. Employer work involvement at the workplace, so to encourage employers to allow domestic violence victims to have paid leave and to have workplace awareness programs. I mean, and it's really in their best interest. A lot of mass shootings that have happened have been a aggrieved, ex-husband comes in, and not only does he kill that woman, but he kills perceived helpers and other people, at the workplace. Men and boys as allies. So, most people who are speaking out against domestic violence are women, but we need men and boys to be engaged. If we could stop this, we already would have. So it's something that we need them to speak out about by challenging, harmful masculinity norms and promoting respectful behavior. Online safety with technology and social media, raising awareness about cyberbullying and online harassment as forms of domestic violence, providing affordable housing with housing initiatives to help survivors leave, therapeutic and counseling services. As you've spoken to, Tammy, domestic violence leaves a scar. Even if you're not physically abused, it can lead to very, very serious mental health issues, problems with moving on and just kind of healing. And it can be a lifelong journey. And then counseling for the abuser, and making sure they have access to counseling, and that is proven to be effective. And policy and advocacy, so advocating for funding and support for organizations dedicated to ending domestic violence, and working towards systemic change by advocating for policies that address the root cause, such as poverty and inequality. And then what I do, not just for domestic violence, but research and data collection, I saw a huge gap, nobody was really tracking women. Police departments are supposed to report all their homicides to the federal level, to the FBI.
Mhm.
And I found out it wasn't compulsory. And even the data that they had, it's just numbers. It's only statistics. So it's hard to tell, well, what was the relationship between those two people? What were the precipitating factors? What else was involved? And so that's why I started what I'm doing, because if you can't understand when something's happening, why it's happening, to whom it's happening, how often it's happening, you can't begin to fight it. We have to have that good data to be able to understand the prevalence and underlying factors. And then engaging the media, encouraging responsible reporting. That's another thing that I do. Jilted boyfriend kills girlfriend. Well, the word jilted means to cruelly cast aside. And it subtly blames the victim. Well, actually not so subtly. So because she broke up with you, and hurt your feelings, you were justified in killing her. So, and then preventing domestic violence requires a collaborative effort involving individuals, communities, governments, and organizations. It requires a commitment to challenging harmful beliefs and behaviors while promoting healthy relationships built on respect, equality, and empathy. So there's a big list of national organizations that I think you're going to put maybe like on your Facebook page or somehow make available. But I just want to read one out for anybody who may be listening. The National Domestic Violence Hotline. Is at the bottom, 1-800.
The tickets going across.
Going across. And so these are great national organizations, but understand that every state in the United States has a state domestic violence organization that you can reach out to. And a lot of websites have a exit button that if you're on there and you need to immediately get out of there, you just hit the exit button and it goes away. But these national resources offer a range of support services, information, and advocacy for individuals affected by domestic violence. And additionally, many states and local communities have their own organizations and hotlines that can provide assistance on the local level.
Yeah, and I'll put it linked on the Facebook page too, but I put it in the comments here just real quick. So that there is a lot of phone numbers and organizations that are listed that Dawn has put in here, and I will make it look neater than the comments there, but it's quickly there if you want to look at it when you're watching this on replay or whenever you watch it. But our mission today was to bring complete awareness to domestic abuse, whether it is like Dawn has said, whether it's physical, emotional, or so many other ways that domestic abuse is presented. So if you missed the beginning, I encourage you to go back and revisit the talk and really get, yourself dug in there. And if if it's yourself or of anybody who might be going through this, encourage them to also watch this and reach out to some of the support phone numbers and everything that Dawn did so well at documenting. But we totally want each and every one of our viewers to understand that they're not alone in this, and that people that you would not suspect have gone through it. I can't tell you how many times in my life that I have been told, I wish I were you because you're always so happy. Because regardless of what I've gone through, I've always had a smile on my face to mask what I was feeling inside. I smile through all of it, even my pain. And unless I'm in the safety of my own home, when I tell my husband, I hurt like hell. But I smile through life, and literally in my brain, when they say, "When which way you're so happy all the time," I would go, "You don't even know what the hell you're wishing for." But thank you. But anyway, domestic violence is a pervasive problem. but it's one that we can all take action to combat. We hope this episode has shed light on the issue and inspired our listeners to be part of the solution and understand again that you're not alone. And if you know a loved one or someone that you work with that is in need of help, please, reach out and give her some of these support lines. Remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, there are resources and support available. Reach out for help because you're definitely not alone. Our main cause for this chat is to touch on real issues and fun issues. It's not always going to be tearjerkers. We will come up with some fun topics too, but we are here to support each and every one of you. My goal in making this chat is for us to come together and talk about real life love and trauma, and so to be there, to listen, to have you communicate, for us to communicate, to tell our stories and maybe inspire you to tell yours. But we want to encourage everyone to, watch it on a replay, share. You have a topic that you'd like to talk about, send us a message. We'll be happy to make a talk about it. So I appreciate everyone stopping in and listening, whether you're on replay or been with us through the live. We love you all. And Dawn, you did an amazing job. What an incredible topic, and what you are doing, I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
It is huge. Well, Linda, I want to give you a big hug because I know how difficult this is for you to be part of tonight. And so I love you more than life itself.
I was going to hear about you in high school. I love it. I want to talk more, Tammy.
I got all the secrets.
Unfortunately, I missed out, but in our next life.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So anyway, I love you, girls. I'm so glad that we touched on this topic. It's a serious.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for all the information that so many people really need to know. So I know this one wasn't fun, but it was much, much needed by so many. Thank you.
Yep. Well, and and in conclusion, I know it's a very dark and sad subject, but I really think that even a situation like being a victim of domestic violence there's a light. I just want to give people hope.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've been in 2 abusive relationships in my life, and as I've done the work that I have documenting femicide, I've realized I could have been one of those women on my list.
Yeah.
But it's also given me kind of like this deep understanding and this love, especially of women. I just think women are the best. Not that I love men too, but we're so strong and resilient and resourceful, and there is light on the other side. And this experience, if you're going through it, can catapult you to other things in your life. I mean, I didn't ask for permission to take on the task that I have with femicide. I'm not a PhD. I don't care. It interested me, and because of my background in it, I feel like I have a deeper understanding.
Yeah.
And I'm the leading femicide researcher in the United States right now. Wow. So, and I just started doing it on my own, on Google Sheets. So, if I can do it, anyone can. So just know that there is a brighter tomorrow. Just don't be afraid to reach out. Do what you need to do to keep yourself safe. And
that's so true, because like all 3 of us are in different relationships now that are so, beyond. Like I never thought there'd be ways out some days.
Doesn't even feel like part of my life anymore. It just is like a story I talk about.
It's so true. It just seems like a story. It does. You go, wow, did I really live through that?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there definitely is hope for so many too.
Yes.
There is another side. There is a way out. There's, you just need to, don't give up. Don't give up.
Yes. Yeah.
And there are plenty of people out there, that can point you in the right direction. And I think the more and more we talk, like you said, break the silence. the more and more we talk about it, the more and more we stand our ground, the more people that, you know, are connected, the better off we're going to be. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes.
I Yeah.
All right. Well, have a
Love
good
you
night.
guys.
Until next time, I'll let you girls know what the next topic is when I come up with one. Any ideas? Send me a message.
I don't know, but it better be light and funny because we need one.
I know. I'm thinking the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Good
You
night.
too.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.